VLPSos here. This is a video lesson for Python programming. User input. These lessons are intended to be paused to give you a chance to practice. We can get input from the user. We're going to use this function called input. If I run my simple program now, it appears that my program has paused. There's nothing happening. The program is waiting for the user to supply input, and it's waiting for the enter key to be pressed to conclude the input. If I pressed enter, you can see the program has finished and has given me the idle prompt waiting for a command. The program didn't do much yet. The program will store input from the keyboard in memory, waiting for the enter key to be pressed. I could show that the computer was waiting by having a print statement that will happen after the enter key was pressed. So the program now is going to run the input function, which is going to wait for input. When the enter key is pressed, then the program will be allowed to continue on and reach this print done statement. Let's see that working. The program is running. I could input from the keyboard, but when I press enter, that's finished and I got to that print statement. We should prompt the user to let them know input is expected. The issue with the program so far is running this line input just by itself would confuse a user because it would appear that the program was stalled. So we're going to give a prompt. We're going to use the input function again, but inside its parentheses, we're going to type the string your thoughts with a question and a space. We're going to give a print statement. And we'll know that the input function with the prompt, your thoughts, will be finished when we see that print statement. That's nice. Let's see what happens. This is the first input statement. Then it asked us for your thoughts, and it's waiting for input. We could give it some thoughts. But whatever we input, we know that we're going to see that print statement when we press the enter key. That's nice. A non-sophisticated response. We inputted our thoughts or something from the keyboard, but what is entered by the user, which we want to think of as what is returned by the input function, is lost. It's stored in memory, but only temporarily. We can store it as a value of a variable for the computer to remember, and then we can refer to that value, or we could refer to that input, or we can observe that input if it's stored in memory under a variable name. And that looks like this. I'm going to choose the variable response. It's colored black, it's not a function. And I'm going to assign it to be what is returned by the input function. So I'm going to assign it to be equal to the function input with a prompt. In this case then, the input function waits for a user to enter something on the keyboard, waits for enter to be pressed. And the input that the user supplied is stored in memory, accessible now by this variable name response, which means now we can use the response variable to observe the input or to use the input. I'm going to use the input in a print statement. I'm going to make a string and I'm going to format it. The string will be, it sounds like you or you are feeling. And then I'm going to use the %s as a symbol and supply the value of that symbol, which must be a string because S stands for string, so it's expecting a string to format this string that's being printed. And the string that will supply the %s with the value is the variable response. Let's see what happens when I run. This is the first input. This is the second. How do I feel is now the new prompt. And we can see that that formatted print line uses the value that I entered. It sounds like you are feeling great. Great is the value of the variable response. The variable name response that I used in this example is not special. We do have to spell it the same way in order for it to be the same variable. We could have chosen anything. I could have chosen any word to be the variable, but it's best to choose names for variables that are descriptive. I could have said x is equal to input, but x is abstract. And we want to avoid using abstract variable names. We want our variables to describe what they stand for. In this case, response describes the prompt that I got from the user. It would be the user's response. I'm going to create 2 more variables and set them equal to the input function. So the values will be assigned what the input function gets from the user. In this case, name is equal to input with the prompt, enter your name. And age will be equal to what the input function will get from the user with the prompt, enter your age. I'm going to then use those 2 variables and create a string which will print hello. %s is going to stand for the string that I'll get from name, who is, and then another %s, which will be the value that I get from age. I then supply the values of those variables at the end of the string with a %, and then in parentheses I need to supply 2 values. The first will be name, the second will be age. And run a program. First input, second input, third input, and now the new input, the new prompt, enter your name, enter your age, and we can see that the formatted print statement says, hello, Sauce, who is 47 years old. Again, it's used the values of the 2 things that were supplied by me, the user. Notice the symbols that were used here, %s, 2 times, both for strings. Might be a little confusing because age seemed like it was intended to be a number. But here we can see that when input is used, the data type of the value that the input gets from the user is always a string. So name is going to be equal to a value that is a string. Age, though we might intend it to be a number, is a string. We can change that. But first, let's make a note of it. The data type of all information that is returned by input is str, string. If you want to change it, you need to use other functions. We want age to be a number. So we can put age and turn it into an integer into a function called int. We can change the data type of age from string to integer. But we're not going to remember that age is turned into an integer unless we reassign age to be equal to the integer form of itself. So we have age equal to the int function with age as the input. This will turn age into an integer and then set it equal now to age, the same variable. We can now, well, let's make a note of it. This line of code was reassigned to be the integer form of itself. And let's see what happens when we repeat this line. Remember, name is a string, and age was a string when it was input that we've turned into an integer. If we run this code, we're going to first get through the first examples. Enter your name, enter your age, and it prints it twice. This line of code here runs even if this %s is an integer, because Python as a language is very kind. Python will often try to make your code work even if you have made some mistake in what you mean by your code. We want this symbol to be an integer, so we should use the %i. And there's an advantage of using integers in a string formatting, as I'll show you. I've copied that line. I'm going to change the line to be the string, I wonder when it will be your, now the integer %i with a th after it, birthday. In this string formatting, I'm only going to supply one value. I've only used one symbol to stand for a value that I need to supply at the end of the string. And it's an integer, I've used a %i. Age is an integer, I changed its type with this line of code. But now I can take advantage of it being an integer by doing math to it right at the time before I'm going to actually use its value. Let's see the effect. The value of age will be what I input when I run the program in this line. But let's see what prints in this line of code. First few examples, enter your name, enter your age, 47. The output is VLPSos, who is 47 years old. Twice because there's two examples. But then the last print line was, I wonder when it will be your 48th birthday. Age is still the integer 47, but because it was an integer, we could add 1 to it to increase it to 48 and take advantage of that as we print dynamically. And let's make a note to be careful. Trying to change the data type of a value that cannot be changed will break your code. Managing user input is important to do well because you can never trust your user to do what you expect. And here we have a line of code that will break. Name is equal to integer of name. If I typed a string like sauce for name, as you'd expect a user to do, and you use the integer function to try to change that string sauce into an integer, and also in this line of code reassign it to be the new value and data type of name, it's going to break our code unless it can be converted. Let's see what happens. I'm going to have to run my code again because I skipped over the line of entering my name. Enter your name, sauce, enter age 47. We see a few lines work, but what broke was the line where it says invalid literal for int with base 10. In other words, this string sauce is not a base 10 number that can be converted into an int or an integer. Impossible, doesn't make sense, so the code broke. Now you. You saw how variables can be used to store data that the input function got from the user. Write a program that prompts the user to answer your own questions and print a well-formatted response to the data which incorporates the input.